It is 2 o'clock, everybody, so we'll try and make a start. And we are a hybrid meeting for the Public Accountability Board for April, so welcome to it. And I won't go through the list of who's here and who's... Well, I will talk about apologies because we have some notable apologies. So we have an apology from the Deputy Chief, Tim Forber, from ACC Dan Thorpe, ACC David Hartley, and from Erica Redfern from my office. Do we have anybody else, Sally, or is that? That's it. Okay, thank you. Welcome everybody else. We are being filmed, so the usual rules apply. If you don't want to be filmed, you'll have to leave the room or switch yourself off in some other way. Announcements. I'm not aware of any announcements. Public questions. We have had some public questions from an anonymous member of the public. We will get answers for those. Well, we have got answers for at least one of the questions. It's a very long answer. If I read it out, we'd be here till about 4 o'clock. So I propose that what we do is print the questions and the answers in our record, in the minutes next time. And that will go for the 2 questions that we've had. The second one we haven't yet put the answer together, but again it's likely to be a very long answer, I think. Urgent items. I did think we might have Shelley Helmsley here. Is she on the line?
No, she's here in person.
She's here in person. Okay.
Let me just pop out and I'll call.
Well, we'll see if we can get hold of Shelley, but we'll move on and then come back to that. I don't think there are any items to be considered in the absence of the public and the press. And declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest of which we know not? Okay. Then moving swiftly to... I think we may have Shelley with us. Yes, we do. Shelley, welcome. You're probably a bit breathless.
Apologies.
The police are always arriving breathless, so it should be nothing unusual for you. So if you're happy, we'll take you straight away, and then you can get away. Is that all right?
No, that's fine.
And the reason for asking the Shelley, who is Chief Superintendent, Shelley Helmsley, who is the District Commander for Sheffield District, is because we've had 1 or 2 incidents, serious issues in the Sheffield area in recent days, and members of the public, some local councils have been raising issues with me, and probably more generally. I think from the point of view of public reassurance, it would be good to get an update as far as you can give it to us on those matters. So over to you. Thank you.
Okay, so my understanding is that you wanted some reassurance around the 2 serious incidents and the murder investigation.
Yes.
So the first murder investigation was a fatal shooting, sadly, where a victim died in Burnfreeze. In terms of that incident, I've had an update from the SIO, who is DCI Nick Haken. They have identified 2 people of interest to the inquiry and are searching to locate those individuals in order to progress the investigation as we speak. In terms of the locality where that happened, it's our Burnley neighbourhood team that cover that area. And since the incidents occurred, they have assessed the community tensions in the locality. Thankfully, they do not appear to be raised despite the really serious nature of the incident. The local neighbourhood inspector has been in close contact with the local councillors around our reassurance patrols, and the community should have seen an increase in police officer patrols in that area since the incident. And that's not just our local Sheffield officers, but also our colleagues in the Operational Support Services Unit. So our traffic officers and our ARVO officers have been on patrol in the area. So that's the first incident, obviously, that has been of concern for us, because clearly that did not appear to to be a random incident. We're still looking at what the motive for that is. And certainly I am concerned, as are our officers, around wider public safety, because that incident would have been alarming for the public. The second incident occurred last week, close to, in the early hours of the morning, close, with quite a large scene, but that included Grimesthorpe Road and the mosque there. In terms of that incident, I've spoken to the SIO, who's DCI Phil Etheridge. There have been 4 people arrested in relation to that investigation so far, and one of those people remains in custody. Clearly, one of our concerns for the public was it's Ramadan, and we wanted to ensure that worshippers could still use the mosque. So very soon after the incident, I was in touch with one of our previous fellows of the Independent Ethics Panel in order to inform him about the incident, and also to facilitate prayers, because that was really important for the local community. The scene was finalised on Saturday in terms of forensic examination, searches for outstanding weapons or any other evidence that would support the senior investigating officer's investigation. And once again, the local area inspector for that neighbourhood, Inspector Gary Bramwell, was in touch with local councils. And from my perspective, obviously my link is with the leader of the council and some of the senior executives in the Sheffield City Council. Certainly on the evening of the fatal shooting, I was in touch with those officials, and very early in the morning following the incident on Grimesthorpe Road. So we've sought to keep our partners updated as much as is possible in quite fast-moving instance.
Well, thank you for that. Yes, I have to say that apart from when the incidents happened initially, I've not really had anything from local councillors or community activists since then, so I assumed that it was being handled as well as you could expect. There was something else. I think this was an arrest on Clun Street. I don't know if you can say anything around that.
So I've been alerted to that this morning.
Right.
As I've just spoken, from our perspective, what we wanted to do was reassure the communities following the 2 serious incidents in the area, and as a result of that there have been additional resources from our operational support unit out on the streets nearby. My understanding is that officers were alerted to a vehicle that they believed to be taxed, that a short pursuit took place with that vehicle, but it was lost, and the officer that had been involved in the pursuit found it later on Clun Street. And whilst dealing with that vehicle, there was an arrest made of a male that was interacting with the police officer for obstructing a police constable in the course of their duties. But that person was arrested and has since been charged and bailed. But I understand there's been a number of videos that relate to that incident that's been circulating amongst the community that has caused some concern. And from that perspective, we've referred that incident to our professional standards department for them to review whether or not the officers' activities or actions during that arrest were appropriate.
Yes, I've seen one of those videos. It's noisy, and there are a lot of officers around the suspect, and I suppose that's the cause of the complaint. And as one of them put it, how many officers do you need to arrest a single person? But it's no doubt more complicated than that, but it's with professional standards.
Yeah, exactly, and we will look into that. The officer the officer did have cause to call for support from other officers as a result of dealing with the incident. And clearly, I suppose the number of officers there demonstrate the reassurance patrols that have been going on in the nearby community as a result of the 2 serious incidents that occurred there. Hence, they were available and quickly to the scene.
Yes, there was a surprising lot of cars, some police cars, all arrived in a very short period of time. So in some ways, that's quite reassuring that you could muster that resource in a short period of time.
That, to be fair, has been in response with the organisation about what our reassurance to the public looks as a result of the 2 serious incidents.
Yeah.
Hence why there's that heightened number of staff in the locality at the time.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And the last thing, I don't know whether you can tell me anything about this, and I only became aware of this about an hour or 2 ago when I was at the Fire Authority meeting, and one of the Sheffield councillors was there, and he was doing some leafleting because of the local elections over the weekend. I think this was probably on Sunday in the Lakes area, if you know Windermere Road and all those named after the lakes up in that part of Sheffield.
You're going to really test my knowledge of a large city now.
Okay.
Sorry, Commissioner.
Well, it was all cordoned off, he couldn't get through, and he was quite concerned about that. But
which
I think
part of the city would that?
Well, this is sort of...
I'm just trying to think.
Okay.
I have a pretty good knowledge from being a Sheffield officer for most of my service. But
this takes you out, depends which way you go, up Ecclesall Road and then down to the left and dropping down at the top of Ecclesall Road.
I think,
anyway.
Commissioner, if you want to send us some details,
yeah,
we'll do a bit of
We're
research.
struggling with the lakes. Yeah, well, I know no more than that, but I said
I'll see if I can find out.
Yes.
What incident that
it was, yeah, the area was cordoned off, and I think he was concerned he couldn't deliver his leaflets. Right, okay. Thank you very much. But it sounds as if it wasn't well, I don't know. We'll see. Not a really serious...
The fact that it's not coming immediately to my mind,
okay.
However, Sheffield, as all areas, police business, especially if there's a scene or any other incident, would be to make sure the integrity of the scene is maintained, and we would take every precaution depending on what the incident was to do that. Sometimes they'll get scaled down very quickly, but I'll see if I can find out.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll give you a map as well. So.
Was it definitely a police road closure?
Yes. Or people pretending to be police officers. They got your tape, I think. So.
We'll have to do some research.
I'll find out, Mum.
Right, thank you very much. You mentioned Mick Hakin, and I was just a peg to hang this on. I was at Child Matters training on Friday, which was... he was there. Yes. Well, I did notice him there, and various other officers. 81 people were in the room, which is a big number. Some people from fire, some people from the hospital, NHS. And very harrowing, very intense, but I think you've all probably been on it, so you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, well worth doing, but quite exhausting by the end of 8:30 to 4:30 was a longish day, but a really good course. Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much. You'll want to get back.
Is that okay?
Of course it is.
Thank you,
very much.
Thank you, Mum.
That took us to item 7. I'm going to jump now to item 10, if that's all right, because we've got Alice with us. Alice, you've been here before. You're a police now student officer. No, yes, student officer. You're a police now.
Just about still, yeah.
Just about still. And you came and you talked to us, and we said we'd like you to come back because you'd only just arrived, really. We'd like to hear what your experiences have been. So we're sorry to put you through all this. When you signed up, I don't think you realised you were going to be put through the ringer, but here you are again, and we'd just be interested to know how you've been getting on.
Yeah, well, I think just for a bit of background, when I spoke last, I'd done about 5 months on the job. I started in July 2020 at training school, so sort of in the last 12 months, police now, just again for a bit of background, we go straight into neighbourhoods, which for me, that was kind of the main reason that I joined through that scheme, because the idea and the concept of neighbourhood policing was something that sat well with sort of my morals and how I would want to conduct myself in the role of a police officer. which over the last 12 months I've been able to kind of really do that of my own accord and put my own swing on things that we're able to do within that role. So developing warrants to disrupt OCGs that are operating in our area. I work in the Parson Cross area of Sheffield in the northeast, so it's quite busy. But no, it's been really good to kind of develop the skills that I'd kind of just started to figure out in the first few months in the job. And then sort of, within the last 12 months, it's been really nice to be able to come into my own a little bit. And I've been signed off now as well as with my full operational competency, which is nice. And another part of the Police Now programme, which is a great opportunity that I've been lucky enough to get a place on, is we get an opportunity to do a 4-week secondment. And I've got a job with GMP in the counter-terror unit in July for 4 weeks, which I'm really looking forward to. So.
Goodness, you are going to be busy.
Yeah, it's been a busy year, but a good year.
Yeah, so it's been the neighbourhood teams all the time that you've been here then?
I have been on, yeah.
Yeah, and then you'll go to GMP then for this?
Just for a 4-week secondment, which there was an application process which I was successful in, but it'll be, again, that's an opportunity that I guess not many officers would have, and so I'll certainly be taking it as much from it as I can, and seeing if that's something that would interest me. But
we might ask you to come back again then. Who knows? But the police now, do they all go into neighbourhoods, or is it just? Yeah. Okay.
So there are 2 pathways. There's Police Now, which people go through the Police Now Academy and then come into force and go into a neighbourhood team. And there's also a Detective Now Academy where officers go through onto a CID pathway, but the traditional Police Now route is all neighbourhood team based.
So now you're able to go out on your own? Is that what it means? That
yeah, I guess so. So within our first 10 weeks, we got what's called IPS, which is independent patrol status, which means you're deemed safe and lawful to go out and do stuff on your own to an extent. But I guess now the full operational competency means that I'm kind of through my probation, and I guess there's now less room for mistakes and stuff like that, because it means that I've been signed off as fully competent within my role.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking the time out to come here in what is a very busy life you're currently leading.
Busy but good.
Good. I'm glad you've enjoyed it, and you're still with us, which is the great news as well. That's brilliant. And I hope it all goes well in Manchester.
Thank you.
And as I say, we might ask you to come and tell us how you got on there. But thanks very much. Unless anybody else wants to.
No, thank you. Our retention levels are reasonably good, Commissioner. It's not a surprise that she's still here.
I wasn't suggesting anything about retention levels, but thanks very much, Alice. And you'll want to get away, I guess.
Yes,
you're welcome
right.
to stay if you want to.
No, I'm going to get off if that's okay.
Yes, of course.
Lovely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mum.
Thanks, Alice.
Right, shall we move in the agenda then to item 8? Sally, you can put me right if I'm going astray here, which is the minutes of the meeting of the Public Accountability Board held on the 9th of March, which have been circulated. Can I take it that they're a true and correct record of what took place? Nobody dissenting to that? And Sally, you may have to alert me if people on the screen do things, if they're out of my sight and maybe out of my earshot if our sign isn't.
No hands.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. Matters arising from those minutes. Michelle, this is in your name, and pages 23 and 24, or 23 rather. Just a couple of actions. Let's see if we can hear Michelle.
Michelle, we can't hear you in here. I'm just going to see if we can play with the volume.
There's no judge from the analysis. When I tried to turn it up, it was at 100%. It's on 100%. It's not a touch screen. Shall I run up and get my Jabra? That would help, wouldn't it?
No.
Have you? Oh, good. Oh, that would really help. I think we can just plug it in, and then it should give us a load more volume.
Well, we'll see what we can do. You probably gathered, Michelle, that we are struggling to hear a little. If I'm reading these are right, I think action 429, SYP would provide the Commissioner with a copy of the People's Strategy. As I understand it, the strategy is nearly complete.
It is, yes. So I'll pick up that action, and Michelle, hopefully you can hear me if we can't hear you. So as I mentioned at one of our previous meetings, we've been working with members from the OPCC, including Michelle, Sophie, etc., to make sure that the format of the People's Strategy is right, and that it covers off all the elements that you want it to. We're just taking that feedback back on board now, with a view that we'll present that back to you hopefully at the next PEG. So it's definitely well in progress.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Thank you. Shall we take it off?
Yeah, you can take it off here. It's been monitored elsewhere.
Yeah, okay. And then 4:30, further discussion would take place with members of the IEP in relation to the Independent Ethics Panel's involvement in exit interviews and SYP's deep dive into the disproportionality in stop and search and use of force. Michelle, let's see how you go now.
No. But it does say...
You've gone from very quiet to silent. No.
It's not.
Michelle, I think we have to stop because I think you may be talking to yourself. Which,
just on that, sorry, Commissioner, just on that action,
yes.
I think it's not due until the 29th of April, where I'm assuming, Michelle, you're going to take it to the next meeting. Was that the summary of the outcome? That it would go to the meeting on the 29th?
Yes.
To the IEP?
Yes.
That's an IEP meeting.
Yeah, so the action, I think, is to take it to that next meeting on the 29th.
Fine. Okay. In that case, we'll probably discharge that one as well.
Okay.
Great. Thank you very much. Moving on then on the agenda to forced performance. We've had Alice at number 10. So 11 then is the Barnsley District Summary Update. Now, I just wonder, are we going to struggle, James, hearing you? Let's try.
No.
Yes, we are
Just coming
struggling.
through the computer. It's not coming through the Jabra at all.
I've just asked for someone in my team to come through.
Oh yeah, James, come down then. That would be really helpful.
Oh, is he here?
Yeah, he's here.
Oh,
I realise
that's
it.
handy, isn't it?
So let's assume he's coming from Barnsley and see how long it takes you to get
Took me 21 minutes, Commissioner.
Right. I'm not sure there's anything else on the agenda we can do.
I don't know what's going on. Yeah, it's just up at 100%. It's not.
Let me take you to item 14, which is the sustainability update. Louise, you're in the room, so
I am.
You're not Danielle, but you are Louise, and it's in Danielle's name, but she's not here.
No.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about the sustainability report?
I'm sorry that Danielle can't be here. She's away from work, so I'll do my best. I can't promise I'll be as enthusiastic and lively as Danielle, but I'll try and get all the main points in. I think the annual report.
It's hard to sustain that degree.
It is. I think I find it too exhausting, to be honest. So I think the annual report is in your pack. So I'm just going to pick out the main points from that report. The strategy was approved and launched in the summer of 2020, and the team have been working to embed that throughout the force since, just to make sure that we have all the foundations in place, basically. So engagement has been key to that. That's been the main thing that we've needed to do. That's been undertaken at a strategic, operational, departmental and a staff level. So the team have been out there, well, it's a very small team, it's only Danielle and Alex, but they've been out there engaging with people as much as they possibly can, and you've probably, various people in the room might have been part of that. So they've presented at 16 strategic boards. There's a few stats in there just to show what they've achieved throughout the year, because it really has been a year of achievement. They've done super well, bearing in mind some restrictions came back in. And then there are quarterly reports for Estates Board and SCT, plus this annual report to show what they're doing and what we're doing within the team to support that. As part of that, we've developed a network of 61 sustainability impact leads. So these are people out there in all different parts of the force who have chosen, who volunteered, or perhaps been volunteered, I'm not sure, but they certainly are interested in sustainability and want to make a difference and develop action plans to deliver sustainability in their own area. And they're supported by, at the moment, 20 senior sponsors who drive that across all the different strategic meetings and are aware of what they're doing locally and how that ties into the strategy as well. They've received training throughout the year, culminating in the first sustainability conference at Botterick Car on the 1st of March, which went very well and was really positive, helped by some lovely weather. So yes, that was a good one. And we've also developed an online sustainability action planning tool. So that is the SILs identify actions and then put together a plan basically to say how they're going to take those forward. There is a section in the force management statement. We've just undertaken a review of that and supplied that through for the new force management statement for this year. And we are included from a sustainability point of view in SCT papers, so that's considered to make sure that it's taken into account. And sustainability now features quite heavily in the estate strategy to make sure the two interlink and work together really well. We've also, just in terms of the things that have been developed, a sustainability impact assessment guide has been pulled together to be used when people are pulling together projects and anything that they're doing in the force to make sure that sustainability is taken into account in all the different parts of it. So there are 7 priorities in the strategy, and they're linked to the UN's Sustainability Development Goals. They're listed in there, but each one has a page which shows all the different things that the team have done this year to make sure that we form the basis to deliver each of those goals. In terms of the report, I think they're all the main points and all the items that the team have delivered. But for the year ahead, there are some key points on the last page for what we want to do in the next year. So we want to build on what we've achieved in 2020-21, build on those foundations that we've already put together. There's a plan to undertake a gap analysis to establish areas requiring focus where we feel we maybe need to redirect resource and make sure that we cover things more deeply. There's a plan to work increasingly closely with key partners to make sure we deepen those relationships. We want to build our network of SILs and sponsors further, and also focus on climate action. So that's something that we haven't worked on in lots of detail yet, but that's in the next phase of the plan. So there'll be a Road to Net Zero report, which we're already working on. We want to embed decarbonisation throughout the estate, and that ties in with funding that could be available from the government, and also to support fleet in a transition to electrification or to vehicles which are low emission, and have a range of EV charging facilities across the estate. So all those are going to be developed this year and hopefully will be featured in next year's annual report.
Thank you very much. Are the SILs, how do you get the SILs? Are they voluntary? Or?
Yeah, largely voluntary, with some, I think some are put forward because it's known that they have an interest in sustainability, but usually it's people who are interested in sustainability and want to take that forward in their role.
Which is better if they've got a personal commitment.
Yeah,
to
very
that.
much so. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, there's a good network there of people who are really interested in it and come forward with lots of ideas of what they can do.
Okay. Well, it looks as though it's embedding well then, and you're pleased, presumably, with
Very
with
much
what's
so.
happening,
Yeah, I do want to make sure, because Danielle is quite rightly sitting within estates, it ties in with the decarbonisation, the EV charging, and the overall approach to energy management as well. But I want to make sure that we do focus on that this year in particular. So that's a personal goal of mine in terms of being the senior sponsor in that area too. But yes, embedding throughout in all different ways, because each area, what we do in estates can't be replicated elsewhere, because everybody has different needs in terms of sustainability and what they would need for their area.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking of good health and well-being, I was attacked is too strong a word. I was slobbered over by a well-being dog at the Child Matters training on Friday, but it was quite a nice little moment of relief in the midst of all that harrowing stuff that we were doing. But, yeah, Springer Spaniel, very springy. Anybody want to ask anything? Are you happy with that? So thank you very much for that.
you.
Do you need to get away?
No, I'm fine. No.
Okay.
I did go to the sustainability conference, the afternoon session of it, and just in relation to the sills, I think the vast majority of them were volunteers, and there was certainly not one person there that I got the impression was a pressed person. It was a really positive and enthusiastic group.
So the days of breaking people's legs, we've given up on that.
Yeah, we've stopped doing that now.
Okay, good. Thanks very much, Ruth. That was, we jumped to item 14. We've got to go back to item 11, which is the Barnsley District summary. Glad you were in the building, James, or we would have been really struggling. So your report has been circulated. As I say, it's item 11, pages 25 onwards. We'll do what we normally do, which is not go through the whole thing in detail, but if I pick out a few things that have occurred to me, and then we'll see whether there's anything that you want to say or other people want to say as well. So thank you for the report, first of all, and which we enjoyed reading. We liked the layout of the Barnsley report here. Just one general word, I think, in these, not specifically Barnsley, but in all these reports, I think increasingly we'll be looking for a focus on the outcomes of various things that are proposed. And it's always good to know what you're doing, but it's even better to know what you're doing and what the outcome of that doing has been. So that's just something for another time. That's not to say you haven't said what the outcomes are in some instances. Page 27, if we can go to that first of all, and to this is in your overview, but you talk there about burglary and residential burglary, and that has been an issue for us well across the piece, but especially in Barnsley. And in para 3.3, you talk there about priority response times and attendance within 60 minutes, 53% of the time. Now that struck me as being a lowish figure, so I wondered if you could just comment around that, and if it is a lowish figure, what is being done to try and get that up a bit.
Okay, I think the first thing I'd probably say around that, Commissioner, is that whilst it seems lower than we probably anticipate, I think it's putting this in the context of the challenge that we've got across the force to meet both emergency and priority demands, and the work that the force are doing, and also that's happening locally around increasing the numbers of officers that are on response, and that comes primarily through the Uplift programme and the programme that we've got in terms of bringing those officers into the service, supporting their ongoing development, both within response and other functions, and actually getting them to a point where they're actually a fully efficient, effective resource that can be deployed to respond. So, for example, we have we're starting to experience, and this is not just unique to Barnsley, a relatively young in-service profile in our response teams, and some of those officers aren't eligible to drive until a certain stage of their development, So that is a factor, and it's something that we work on very closely every day in terms of monitoring the resourcing levels, the incident queues that we have.
Is that about age or experience?
It's about it's not an age thing, it's about their length of service and development and the time of which as part of the programme that they go on their driving course, which is an abstraction from response when they do that. But obviously it needs to come at the right time in their development as well, because there is a whole host of other training, learning, development modules that they go through as part of their programme. So there's a comprehensive plan of student officer development, and weaved into that is the driving course. But if you can sort of picture the scenario of young marine service officers on response, not all fully able to drive with blues and twos, that is a challenge for us in the short term. We monitor that on a daily basis, and we mitigate that by taking practical decisions around demand management on a daily basis, looking at what resources we've got across the district, and make sure that we prioritise the incidents within the priority queue to get to the ones that need that level of attendance. Some other things that the force are doing, and again it will be coming to Barnsley shortly, is there's been a pilot piece of work through force control room, looking at removal of the resource management sergeant function, which is something that all districts used to have. We piloted this first at Doncaster and then to Sheffield, but before it rolls on to Barnsley and Rotherham, I think there's a few other things that need to just be finalised as part of that pilot. So at face value, yes, it does look probably lower than you would expect, but the assurance in that is that actually those priority incidents are being triaged. We've got supervision looking at those incidents, and we are prioritising the ones in the queue that we need to get to where the greatest level of harm is and risk presents itself. We do very well around emergency attendance, and clearly that is the priority when those calls for service come in. But we are actively seeking to try and increase that amount and make sure that we improve service around that priority area. But that is an area of concern for us, but it's an area of concern for which we've got plans and we daily monitor.
Yeah, I mean, if I go on to the next paragraph, sticking with residential burglary, you say that it is increasing, volumes are returning to pre-COVID levels.
Yeah.
The suggestion seems to be that it may not stick at it may rise above that. I just wonder how you see the issue, what the problem is.
Yeah, I think in terms of residential burglary, if you sort of rewind to pre-COVID levels, so 1920, which was the last sort of full year, we were at 1,426 residential burglaries. For the year that's just finished, 21-22, we're at 1,251, so we're 12% down on that pre-COVID level. There has been a rise as we came out of lockdown, and we experienced that locally. We did have some specific areas and localities that we were experiencing higher than normal rates, but work that's been done over the Christmas period, since the Christmas period, to get on top of that issue has brought us back down to much more manageable, sustainable levels. For example, we sort of work on an average of about 3 burglary dwelling residential burglaries a day in Barnsley, 21 a week. We've sort of been in line with that for the last several weeks, and in the last 24 hours alone we've had 1, which is pretty good. So we are very alive to emerging trends, patterns and issues, and we have a comprehensive plan that we put into place when that occurs, on top of our daily management of the problem, and focus on the offenders, the forensic hits that we have, and the service that we give to victims. That's resulting for us in an outcome rate at the minute for burglary around 6%, which again there's definitely room for improvement, but that is certainly above the force average in terms of our outcomes in relation to burglary at the minute. So, but more to do.
Staying on the same page, but moving down, protecting vulnerable people to para 4.4, domestic abuse. It's arrest rates, I think, that caught my attention there.
Yeah.
The reduced arrest rates for medium and standard risk cases, and I just wonder, well, I wonder a number of things, but why that should be, and what the impact of that will have on the violence against women and girls strategy if that doesn't shift, and the whole question of safeguarding around those domestic abuse cases. Is this a matter of lack of resources, is that the problem?
Not at all, no. And I think the positives around domestic abuse in Barnsley is actually we perform very well in terms of outcomes for victims, and we maintain relatively high outcome rates, consistently high, higher than the force average, 18.5% in this period, which was up on the previous period, and we maintain similar rates around violence per se across the board, certainly averaging over 20%. So actually the arrest factor is something that we focus on, but that is not just the determining cause as to whether or not actually we end up in a positive outcome for the victim. There's a broader context around this, where this is anticipated to some degree as well, because the definition of domestic abuse is broadening, which will mean that there are more incidents that in the past would not have been categorised as domestic abuse, and as a consequence of that, from a volume perspective, proportionately you would expect to see a smaller proportion of arrests. But again, we focus on the priority offenders. In the high risk cases, we well in excess of sort of 92-95% on average for our arrest rates. And just because it's medium or standard risk doesn't mean that it doesn't get the level of focus. It's about quality of investigation, prioritising resources that we have to focus on those key individuals and repeat perpetrators. But we do maintain very good domestic abuse outcomes and arrest rates comparative to national figures. I think it's around 9% nationally, is my understanding.
We're significantly above national averages in terms of arrest rate, and that's as a result of the focus over the last 3 years on domestic abuse arrest. And I think James has alluded to it. It's not just about arrest. We've focused heavily in the last year or so on timeliness of arrest. And there's been some further work to analyse what impact the timeliness of arrest has on victim attrition, particularly. And it's inconclusive at the moment, I think it's fair to say, James. We had a long conversation at one of the most recent FPDs, I think it was March FPD, to really understand what the impact of timely arrest, i.e. within 24 hours. It would be great if we could arrest everybody at the scene, but often, after the event, the perpetrator will leg it, for want of a better word, and therefore it does take some time to track them down. Some can be really elusive, it's fair to say, and we've had bespoke operations in place to track down and arrest really either serial perpetrators or high-risk perpetrators, and that's a frequent occurrence at districts, to manage that kind of manhunt for individuals. So that will distort the timeliness, those kind of long-winded operations will distort the overall timeliness of arrest. But I think we are, as a force, when we look at ourselves compared to our MSG and national comparators, we have a very robust approach to domestic abuse, far more so than, and a far greater understanding of each aspect of the journey for a domestic abuse victim, which isn't to say we can't improve, of course we can, and as you know, our Violence Against Women and Girls IAG is going to be at the forefront of telling us what the victims think, together with our ISVA service and INVA service, around what more can we do to overcome the barriers that many victims have about supporting a police prosecution or a prosecution. So there is more work to be done, but just to reassure you and the public that comparatively we're in a strong position. And James is right that October we saw the broadening of the definition, which does to some extent dilute some of the emphasis on domestic abuse, because it's been extended quite widely in terms of family members. And when we think about we talk about violence against women and girls, we really want to focus our energies on those where there is an imbalance of power, where there is coercive control, because that's where we know it has that huge detrimental impact not only on victims but on the children that are witnessing this on a daily basis. But clearly, we've always got more to do.
And I think just on that point, just to further some more detail around outcomes, if you put that in the wider context around violence towards women and girls, and accepting that not all of this is violence towards women and girls, if you look at our outcome performance in respect to sexual offences, we are performing very well as a force comparatively. The district, compared to the rest of the force, we're at 11%, which is well above the force average. And for most serious violence offences, we've got outcomes in the region of 26%. So there is a real strong focus on outcomes performance in Barnsley, particularly around violence, particularly around sexual offences, and particularly around domestic abuse within the family setting.
Thank you for that. Can I turn the page to page 28 then, 4.7. This is cyber-related sexual offences against children. I wonder if you could say, if you know, what the numbers are. What are we talking about here in terms of numbers? We've got some stuff in percentage terms, but what are the actual numbers? And something about the age profile of victims, perhaps even of perpetrators as well. I wonder whether this is what kind of abuse this is, whether it's secondary, primary, whether it's peer-on-peer, that sort of thing. Just a bit more information around that.
Okay. I mean, in terms of specifics around numbers, I'd need to come back to you with some further detail around specifics in relation to those. I think in the broader context with this, and this is, again, understanding some of the work that the force are doing around identifying vulnerability. Secondly, around making sure that we record crimes in line with the National Crime Recording Standards. The force has done a lot of work to identify crime, correctly record it, and then make sure we're putting appropriate investigations and safeguarding around the victims in there. I think what you've got in here is just the changing nature of criminality in society to some degree. So a lot of this that we're talking about here is in relation to children of a school age. Some of this may be sharing of images between children at a school age, which because of the rules around National Crime Recording Standards and crime data accuracy, a child sends an image to another child and that child returns one that could actually constitute crimes. And there is a very strong emphasis around education, safeguarding in that environment, and not over-criminalising children and trying to sort of change some of that behaviour. In terms of understanding of the specific problem and the extent of it within Barnsley and the schools, there is a little bit more work to be done, and on the back of this I'm happy to go and have a look at what we can do in terms of an understanding of the profile more and the detail of that. But the information we've got at the moment is that broadly it's relatively low level offending between children of a school age, committed online because of the developments in technology, and a better understanding from a police officer perspective around the importance of recording these matters, ensuring appropriate safeguarding and putting proportionate response in place. Not a case of online cyber offending with people external to that environment. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but the bulk of what we're talking about in here is that us identifying offences that in the past may not have been formally identified or recorded. But we will certainly do some more work around trying to understand the extent of that problem. We have 2 officers that work exclusively within schools across Barnsley, so they have to spread their time accordingly, and we target those officers to the schools where we experience the greatest issues, in particular around hate crimes sometimes in schools, some of the language and abuse that can go on, bullying, etc. We try and use those officers to work in those environments and provide support to the schools that need it most. And more detail of that problem would assist us in further focusing that effort. But I make the point really it's actually relatively low level offending in the context of wider risk.
Okay, but clearly something to be watched.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I'm on to page 29. Tackling crime and antisocial behaviour is the heading at the top there. 5.2. Talk about now we are on to outcomes. I think you talk about the 7x3 plan, and I wonder what the outcomes have been of this.
Yeah, so in terms of the the 7x3 plan for people that aren't aware is 7 core operational departments in Barnsley all contributing to their bit of work around burglary, residential burglary. So for example, 3 key tasks for our intelligence team that we expect to be undertaken, 3 core tasks by our response officers, etc., across all our different departments. In terms of some of that work in relation to residential burglary, and sort of outlined in the report there is some of the key inputs from our perspective that's achieved. In terms of the number of hours dedicated patrol, so in the region of 630 hours, and I can explain how we can be so accurate around some of that as well. 242 curfew checks, now that's checking on people that have been arrested, bailed, or on a curfew for burglary and similar offences to make sure that they're complying and not out further offending. Over 2,300 cocoon visits, so that's visits by predominantly neighbourhood officers to visit the adjacent properties to those that have been subject to a burglary to make sure that appropriate crime prevention advice and support is provided. 18 arrests around key suspects, over 127 offender management visits, so again non-perpetrators that are part of our cohort of priority offenders, focusing visits with our integrated offender management team around those individuals, and having a regular focus on reviewing our daily and monthly tactical intelligence products, i.e. briefing products that go out to frontline officers to tell them where the problems are and to give direction about what we expect. From a command team point of view, we piloted and continue to make use of some technology to see how well our patrols are doing in that area. And very difficult to see on the paper, but in effect there is I think I've raised this before in relation to the use of this technology. When we're doing direct patrol, particularly around burglary hotspots, we equip officers with some tracking devices which enable to us to see the length of the patrols that are being carried out and the speed of the patrols, the time, the quality of the actual patrol that's taking place. And is it focused on the key areas and the key streets where we want that to be? And we're seeing that has having some real benefits for us in terms of reduction, because we check that every day at our daily management meeting to make sure that the last night's patrols took place and are they in the areas where we asked them to be done, and is the quality of the patrol that we'd expect, and actually are the key test, have we had any burglaries in that area, and often the answer, if you do it right, is that you get lower rates of burglary. Always a challenge overnight because of the demand coming through the door with emergency incidents and priority incidents. So all of that as a whole, in terms of converting into outcomes in respect to burglary, for Barnsley, comparatively is positive. We're in the region of about 6% positive outcomes for burglary. Clearly room for improvement, but higher than the force average, and constantly an area of focus for us. Okay.
So that was 5.3, and that's the little yeah. Table down below. Thank you. Page 30. The page that is 5.5. This is Safer Streets forensic marking kits. I just wonder if you could say a word about that, how they've helped you to tackle crime for residents?
Absolutely. I think the 12 Streets initiative is absolutely about engagement and prevention, part of our plan. So there's different aspects to our plan around pursuing the offenders, gathering intelligence, engaging with communities and providing that reassurance. And this very much fits in with our work on prevention and engagement. So going back to our 7B3 plan, a lot of this is delivered through our neighbourhood teams and our PCSOs that are going out, being tasked with delivering inputs to put to the public around 12 core streets when we identify a particular area, and making use of some of the preventative tools that we've got, such as property marking, etc., signage on streets. All of that is very helpful in terms of reduction, and the more that we can stop offences of burglary, clearly the easier it becomes to focus your efforts on where it's happened and the offenders that we already know about, which can lead to improved outcomes. So prevention and engagement is a big part of our plan around burglary as a whole in terms of reductions and outcomes performance. So education of the public and providing a kit like this is essential, and it works.
Do the local councillors for those 12th Street area, do they comment on this? Do they?
I couldn't specifically answer that. Clearly there is direct engagement with the neighbourhood inspectors and the local councillors around specific issues in their area, but I'll certainly go and speak to our Chief Inspector neighbourhoods just to pose that question around what's the level of understanding amongst local councillors where we initiate to our streets.
I mean, sometimes they welcome these initiatives and sometimes they say, why are you drawing attention to us? We're not a bad area, that sort of thing. I just wondered what the impact of this was. But,
yeah, I've certainly not had any feedback of negativity around it.
No one's come to me about it, so good done. Okay. On page 31, 5.14, this is this initiative, the pilot scheme, Clear, Hold and Build. And if you could, again, say a word around that. And something about the fund, where does the funding for this come from? Is the VRU involved in this?
Yes, so firstly, there's no additional funding for it. However, we do work very closely with the VRU around the problem. In terms of the pilot scheme, the force has undertaken a lot of work over the last 5 or 6 years to get ourselves in a good place in relation to tackling serious organised crime. So we start from a position of strength in this area. But actually some of that learning that's been developed nationally is around what's the best approach for tackling identified organised crime groups, and the approach around clear, hold and build is a concept, an approach to tackling a particular problem in a particular area. Without going into any sort of operational detail around how it's used in simple terms, it's about providing focus to 3 phases where an organised crime group has got a foothold in a particular community and is having an impact and causing harm to that community. The first phase of it is about clearing the ground. It's about actually very overt, very visible, often police-led, but working very closely with partners to take action around offenders, to execute search warrants, to provide that visible presence, and to really try and get a hold of some of that offending and just clear the ground in the first instance. Once you've done that, and historically through policing and through sighting, what often happens is that a void gets created and somebody comes in to fill that void. So if you just do that enforcement and walk away, then the community is left behind, and that's not what this is about. This is about working with the community and with partners. So having gone through a clear phase, you then move into a hold phase with partners and involve the community more to look at what initiatives we can do to make the environment more resilient, to encourage and support partnership working across agencies around emerging issues. And then building is very much about the police not walking away, always having a footprint in that area, but actually being able to step back from an operational perspective, because the community, local partner organisations, local authority are very much looking at some of those initiatives that are helping to build resilient communities in the long term. So it's a concept, we're part of a pilot nationally. The pilot is going very, very well from our perspective. We're learning from elsewhere, such as Bradford, and some lessons learned in other parts of the country. We're working very closely with the Home Office. We've engaged very closely with local councillors to make people aware about the work that we're doing. And in the fullness of time, I'm sure that this will start to have an impact and a positive impact in a particular area that we're doing some work. So,
but this is something the Home Office have asked you to do, but they're not providing any funding for it.
No, I think it's part of the funding that comes to the force will be part of the violence reduction unit, and there is no specific funds for the
No, and I think it's about sustainability as well, you know, ensuring, because actually this is within the gift of the partnership, and it's using the best practice, like James says, from other areas of the country. So we've been linked into the Clear Whole Bill lead from the Home Office throughout this whole process, and the reason Barnsley has been selected is because there was limited work being done around a particular OCG, wasn't it? So it was a nice pilot to do, because a lot of our other OCGs in Barnsley and right across the force have had a lot of activity, a lot of targeted activity focused on them. There was this one particular area in Barnsley, quite a relatively new OCG, so it gave us an opportunity to test this model and to actually get the really glean that effect, that learning from this pilot. So I think it's still in the early stages, isn't it? And it takes time to evaluate, because like nothing happens overnight. The enforcement phase will be quite protracted, and then, as James says, that vacuum, to avoid the vacuum being filled by other drug dealers, you have to give yourself quite a considerable amount of time to test whether your efforts have worked. And it's very much a partnership approach. This is definitely not. We're the clear bit, aren't we?
Yeah.
The remaining sections are very much focused on other partnerships to ensure that we're working as a whole system to clear, and it's inherently linked to most serious violence, because most of the OCGs we know have the primary issue of drug dealing. So it's still in its early stages, and I think we can bring it back as we move through the pilot, can't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it seems a good idea.
It's a great idea.
Yes.
It just takes time.
Yeah. Well, okay. Thank you. The last thing, I'm not sure it is a question or comment really, on 6.4, which is page 32, stop and search. I found the table a bit tricky to understand, and I'm sure the public probably would feel the same. But I just wondered whether you could say anything about who's being stopped and what age groups are we talking about here, and whether there's anything you can tell us about stop and search in Barnsley?
Yeah, okay, so in terms of the stop and searches across Barnsley as a whole, so the first thing just to sort of outline within this data here is that we sort of have a positive outcome rate of about 25%, which is sort of in line with other areas of the force.
Is it 25 or 21, top of page 33?
33. So in terms of, I'll just double check that. There's another table I've got here. Probably I can put this in context for the rest of the forces. Just bear with me. So if I just give you some broader data to give you context really around this. So looking at February's data, for example, across the force there were 953 searches. Barnsley undertook 149 of those, which is about 16%, which is broadly in line with our sort of the profile and demand split that you would expect Barnsley to achieve. Of those 149, 37 led to a positive outcome, which is 25%. The range across
what period is this?
So the data that you've got on this, and I'll get further information around the stop and search data for next time in terms of the length of it, because there is some work to do in this space, which I'll come on to shortly. So the table that you've got on there is for the 3-month period, November to January. So that's what's in the paper.
But the figures you were quoting then weren't
yes,
that?
Absolutely. So the figures that I've just given there are for February, okay? And those are just trying to give you more comparison in relation to the rest of the force area, just to give you a sense of what those are. But in the 3-month period that they've just outlined there, the sort of average outcome rate we get for stop and search is about 25%. If you look at the proportion, the percentage of those against different ethnicities. So, for example, for people that are white, the positive outcome rate is in the region of 20%. For people that are black, it's in the region of 27%, and for people that are Asian, it's in the region of 40%. But the numbers are much lower. So, in Barnsley, there have only been 11 searches of people who are black and 5 of people that are Asian. 412 are white. That's over a 3-month period. So the majority of stop and searches in Barnsley are conducted in relation to people that are white. Comparing that across the force, so the data range for the force, which is not in this table, but this is in a separate document, which is data produced in February. I'm assured around our proportionality of searches comparative to other districts that we carry out about 16%, which you would broadly expect in Barnsley. I'm assured around our outcome rate of 25% comparison to some of the areas. The range there is between 21 and 33% across the districts. The force average is 27, but one of the districts has a higher rate, which really does bring that average up. So at this stage, the data around disproportionality for stop and search does have some limitations, and I know there's a separate action in relation to this through that's been picked up through the OPCC, but the force are also looking at this, and we're in the process of providing more information to yourself, Norm, tomorrow at the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Board to look at what more the force can do to improve understanding around disproportionality across hate crime, stop and search and use of force, 3 key areas for us. And there are some challenges in that in terms of the data, and one of the key ones is around the census data at the moment, which we're working off, which is from 2011, and the latest census data is anticipated to be released later this year. So I think the data around disproportionality will evolve and will develop, and at future meetings this will make sure we bring back more mature data of that over a longer period to make sure you see any sort of patterns, trends, with greater explanation around it, because I do understand that the numbers etc can be quite complicated to assure, but in terms of assurance around stop and search and making sure that it's used sensibly, it's used proportionately, and it's subject to scrutiny. That is a key focus for our force lead in this area. One now is doing a lot of work in it and is developing how we use scrutiny panels to make sure that we make better choices, good choices around stop and search.
Thank you. I wonder if, Chief Constable, if I could ask, 21%, would you say that's getting towards territory where we should be concerned if it fell below that?
I think it's really difficult to set an arbitrary target. I mean, I think actually one in five...
wouldn't be totally arbitrary, would it? It'd be saying, based on experience, if you fall below this, the consequences on communities might be...
I think we would need to look over a longer period of time in order to really sort of understand historically what the trends are. I think at the moment, between 1 in 5, 1 in 4 people that are being stopped indicates to me that the power's being used appropriately. It doesn't cause me any concern. Like if we were looking at sort of single figure returns, and clearly I'd have a significant concern around that. But through the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Board, we are looking at actually all of our data around disproportionality, and not just what it tells us, but actually what some of the indicators underneath that might be around community tension. So we are developing some more sophisticated metrics.
Okay, thank you. They were all the questions I got. In fact, the report seemed to fall off a cliff edge at that point. But thank you very much for that. Was there anything that you wanted to add?
No, not
anything anybody else?
Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Are you slipping away? Or?
There's a theme, isn't there?
That's fine. Thank you very much, Chief. Thank you. That's fine. Moving on to force performance against the police crime plan. This is in the name of Team 4, but 35 to 52. But Tim isn't here,
I'm going to speak to
my
it.
guess is that it's you then.
It is indeed.
You volunteer. So, if I can find it, it's number 12, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Again, we won't go through it all, but if I can ask
Of course.
the odd question, starting on page 37, I think it was. Yeah, 37. This is 310, 311 probably. Investigations Improvements Unit, IIU, which is difficult to say. IIU. You talk about toolkits, guides being produced and so on. I wondered what the take-up of the toolkits had been, what you could say around that, whether they're used consistently and whether you think they're helping.
So it's still quite early days in the IIU's life. As you know, it was instituted last September as part of our commitment to improving investigations right across the force, because we do have an area for improvement from HMICFRS. So the IIU have been spending a number of months getting that qualitative assessment of where we are in terms of investigative standards, and then coming up with some solutions to help our staff to get to the standard that we would expect. And that isn't saying that they're not all, but there is, we've got a young, inexperienced workforce, as we know, and so this is to help them and guide them through the process and equip them with the skills with which to investigate effectively. So the IIU have come up with a number of documents. We test it at our monthly Driving Up Investigative Standards Board and the Investigative Governance Group. And I think it's fair to say that the template, because at the moment it's sitting on a Word document which is not integrated into our Connect crime recording system, it has had some take up, but not as much as I would like. So what we've done is, Jayax, who is leading on the IIU for me, he is working with Connect to build it in, so it's an integrated document within Connect, so it will facilitate the completion and make it easier for police officers to do that. And we're doing a Rotherham pilot around the handover document, so so often prisoners are handed over because they are kept in and either they're intoxicated or there isn't the evidence available, so they're kept in for a number of hours, and that overlaps different shifts. So there will be from myself to another police officer a document of what I've done, what needs to be done, and then that the subsequent officer can deal with it. So what we're trying to do is really build it in, integrate it into kind of common work practices, which will then lead to a far more effective and integrated way of using the template. So that's happening as we speak, and Rotherham is our guinea pig for that, and we'll be using the learning from it to roll it out further. We also have embedded the guidance and the template in a lot of our training, so there's been masterclasses for all sergeants, acting sergeants, inspectors, acting inspectors. We are embedding it all within the tutor academy, because we realise that a brand new cop goes out and the person they rely on most heavily for advice and guidance is their tutor. So we're ensuring that the tutors have that requisite level of understanding and application, and it's always also embedded within the PQF framework. So through that mechanism, we're really trying to mainstream it. Like I said, it isn't exactly where I want it to be right now, but it is still very early days. We're only in the first couple of months of rollout. And officers are busy. You've heard from James how busy they are. And there is a bit of a perception issue, so we need to say, look, this isn't more work, this is just in a different place, which sometimes takes quite a lot to convince. So hopefully the Rotherham pilot will really help us, and what we're going to also use is their colleagues telling them to use it, because it actually benefits them, it helps them through the investigation. So rather than me just saying, what a great idea this is, when I don't actually use it every day, I want it to come from their colleagues to say, yeah, actually it did help me. And so we're building on all of that kind of communication strategy to embed this. So it's still early days, but it is taking best practice from around the country that we've gleaned from West Yorkshire, who've done very well in their recent HMIC, Peel Inspection, Humberside, and other forces around the country, and who've had the same challenge as us. So we are using the best practice from around the country and embedding it.
So more to come. We'll hear more.
Absolutely.
In the future. Yes.
Definitely.
In terms of tutors, are we tutored up? I mean, have we got more tutors than we know what to do with, or do we struggle?
We've got enough. We've just about got enough tutors to deal with the influx of students coming through the PQF, because it's a huge uplift, as we all understand, in a very tight time frame. So, and actually their rotations cause different issues with peaks and troughs of demand, dependent on their rotation in and out of university into different disciplines. As we know, they do CID. So historically, we didn't need tutors in CID. But now we do need the equivalent of a tutor within CID, because you've got relatively inexperienced police officers with less than 12 months service going into a CID environment. So we've had to upskill officers right across all of our different portfolios, whereas normally, historically, it would have simply been in the response function.
It's quite difficult getting across to ministers that uplift brings all these consequences in train, that their answer to all our questions is, well, you're getting the numbers, and that solves it all, because they're all fit, ready, and can go out on the streets at once. And they just see this as being awkward and troublemaking.
There's a whole infrastructure that has to sit around, to create a successful, student to be a fully fledged officer. And I don't think you're quite right that is necessarily, it isn't given the prominence that the number of officers is given. We've worked really hard in South Yorkshire to put in place all of the infrastructure, whether that is tutors, whether that are assessors, whether that is, the building where we do the training. We've really had to invest significantly to do that, but that's important. Because we want these to be successful and sustainable officers for the future. So, but I do think people focus on a number without all of the work, and there has been a lot of hard work to put in that infrastructure to support them. So,
and I'm starting to get it now from the public as we're getting out and about more and going around to public meetings of one sort or another. They're saying exactly the same thing, and they're hearing it usually from ministers. You've got your 20,000, where are they? And they're all in neighbourhood teams, and they should be in our team, and where are they?
And that's there's a case study from Alice earlier, although she's in a different pathway because she's police now, there is a general comparison with a routine pathway, whether it's PCDA or DHEP, and you join, after a certain period of time, you get independent patrol status, which means you can go out by yourself, but you can't drive at that point in time. And then you move on from being able to be independent patrol to being fully operationally competent. She's just been signed off at nearly 2 years service. So there's an extended period of time there to get these great new people who are really enthusiastic, really keen. We're giving them really good support and training, but it does take time to get them to the point of being fully operationally competent. And until they are at that point, they quite often require additional support from the colleagues around them. So not necessarily just a tutor who would be dedicated to supporting a new officer on a one-to-one basis for a significant period of time, which impacts on their availability and capacity to do work. But actually there might be sort of a more informal requirement for support, and actually could I just get some advice on this, and it just does take some time. And I think the other piece that's sometimes missing out of the public narrative is that not only are we recruiting our uplift numbers, but we're also recruiting to sort of replace the natural turnover that we would get. So in reality, we're probably recruiting one and a half times as many people as the uplift would suggest, all of which causes us these kind of pressures within the system, which are good pressures to have, and when we get over the kind of hump, we'll really start to feel the benefit. But I think actually that broader understanding is something that would be really helpful.
Yes, I mean the retired about 700 and odd, wasn't it, from over the last year to up to 2024, which is in itself is a big number. Just going back to the driving that they do, they have to pass that. There is an issue about age, isn't there? Because is it vans that they can't drive?
Most of them don't have the correct notification, or whatever they're called, on your driving licence categories. I think it's D, isn't it, for a long wheelbase transit or equivalent, and I think it's quite a while ago that changed now. So anyone who's kind of under 40 and passed their test won't be able to drive a van. So we do have an issue of only our older cops can drive our bigger vehicles because of the categorisation on their driving licence.
Sarah and I can both drive.
We can both drive the vans, but this is something we can overcome. But it's just another course that they have to do.
Yes, the only reason I know is because I was at a police station and the only vehicle available was a van, and they couldn't drive it. And that, that again is just one more thing.
And it does pose us a challenge with our national obligations around public order, which all go around in big vans. So again, it is something we are factoring in as we move through the generations, because it is it's absolutely critical that we have enough people to drive the larger vehicles. Just another factor to build in.
Okay, thank you. Can I take you to drugs on page 37?
Yes.
And this is, in 3.14, first of all, you say a drugs market problem profile has been commissioned. I don't know when that.
Yes, it's due out in a couple of weeks.
Are we able to see that?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. I've checked with Joe Tilbury, our principal analyst, and it's just in the process of being finally QA'd. It will go back to the thematic lead, Paul Murphy, within the next few weeks, and then it will be available for public public consumption, that's not true. Our consumption and to the OPCC with caveats around dissemination.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll look forward to that with caveats. And 3.15, the Home Office grant, recently approved, used to deliver testing on arrest in the presence of Class A drugs. I just wonder if you could say again something about what that involves, and perhaps a little bit about. Say that first of all, and then I'll come on to the.
Okay, so this all originated with trigger offences, which is what we were talking earlier, really, around SAC offences. So serious acquisitive crime, we talked about burglary. We know that most burglary, theft of small items, theft from motor vehicle, etc., is committed by recidivist offenders, and therefore these trigger offences are those where we have, and they may be part and parcel of a condition, so they might be breaching their conditional order from a court if they continue to take Class A predominantly, So this is how it was introduced, but now it's being expanded. So you can have drug testing for other crime types as well, with an inspector's authority. So
at the moment they're not being tested.
No, they can be with an inspector's authority.
Right.
So if I was arrested for any form of burglary or theft, I could I can walk into a custody and I would be able to be drug tested without anyone's authority.
What about speeding?
No.
So people who are caught
You wouldn't
speeding.
often be arrested for speeding. So there's this is drug testing in custody, which is
Right.
quite different to drug testing at the roadside,
Okay.
which I think the paper covers later on in the document when it talks about speeding and road safety. It gives you the number of drug wipes and drug tests performed at the roadside. So that's a slightly different environment.
Okay.
So this is all in custody, and so the trigger offence, as soon as you've been arrested for a trigger offence, you can get drug tested in custody without anyone's authority. There is additional crime types now that we can drug test with an inspector's authority, and what we've been doing here in South Yorkshire, in a way to tackle some of the recidivism around domestic abuse, is use the same policy around drug testing with an inspector's authority, in order so that you can actually pass on and refer someone who is testing for cocaine, let's just say. You could then put a referral into our liaison and diversion service, our drugs and alcohol misuse services, to try and tackle some of the root causes for the abuse. And this is relatively new around the domestic abuse, so we're still kind of pulling all the numbers together, which we could happily bring back to PAD in the future. But the money that we secured from the Home Office has enabled us to raise awareness of all of those different aspects of drug testing in custody, and ensure that we had someone monitoring it to really embed it in people's mindsets. So I had someone looking at the custody board pretty much all the time saying, right, this person could be drug tested, let's consider this person's been arrested 3 times for domestic abuse, let's get them with an inspector's authority on a drug test. So there's been a big comms campaign, a training element to raise awareness of where you can drug test, and getting the equipment in, because obviously greater demand, we need more kit. So that's what the money's been spent on.
Can you cope with all this? This extra?
Yes, we can. Because to be fair, it's quite a quick and easy thing to do whilst in custody, and we're the drugs leaders working closely with our Chief Inspector in custody to embed it into their normal day-to-day practice as well. Again, to mainstream it. So we're pretty confident that it's an entirely sustainable solution.
Okay.
So that seems to be going well, and what we've seen since Operation Aspect, which is where the month-long operation, a 200% increase in testing. Now that might be obviously as a direct reaction to the training and the raising awareness campaign, but if we could settle down at an increase, that would be a really positive outcome for us.
Sure, thank you. I'm looking at page 39 now. This is 3.23. It's Financial Investigations Unit.
Yes.
And I just wonder if you could say something again around that, where the force is at in terms of recruitment of people to this and retention, which seem to be the big issues.
Yeah, so under the crime review in 2018, financial investigators went out to districts. They were under a centralised model, and a decision was made to put them out locally, which, in my opinion, was a very good move, because actually what that made, and actually fundamentally critical right now, because more and more crimes have a financial element. It gives you lines of inquiry that you probably hadn't considered before, in terms of confiscation, freezing assets, freezing accounts, unpicking someone's kind of financial history, particularly around OCGs. Are more prominent and sophisticated criminals. You absolutely need the skills of a financial investigator to understand their criminal lifestyle, and to take that away from them, hopefully, because it's what we seek to do. And in order to do that, you needed those kind of experts aligned with our functions at a local level. So and as you know, I was a district commander before this role, and they were really, really beneficial, because they would not only help with the criminal aspect, but they would also be really helpful around a high-risk missing person, for example, to actually understand, okay, how can we trace this person through financial activity? So really, really useful. So that was embedded in 2018. I think it's fair to say there have been some challenges around retention, but it's something we're looking at as part of our people strategy on harder to fill roles. So looking at our options available.
These are staff, are they?
Yeah, our police
officers?
staff, predominantly police staff. Historically, we did have some police officers that were trained as FIs, so financial investigators, but there was a move to civilianisation because you don't need warranted powers to perform the role. You do need a load of other qualifications that enable you to go and confiscate and present to a court to secure orders, but so it is predominantly civilians.
But the risk is they're poached.
The risk is they get paid more by the private sector and some other public sector bodies as well. But a lot of them come and they stay because they enjoy the work, because actually they're doing what they want to, what they really want to do, which is take money off the bad guys. But I guess at the moment when we're all facing rising household costs, there are people with young families that are genuinely struggling, and therefore another job that pays an extra £10,000–15,000 a year is very enticing, isn't it? Despite your morals and your commitment to public sector. So it's something we're looking at all of our options available to us to increase the attractiveness of SYP and the role of FI. And also we've just gone through an economic crime, phase 1 of the economic crime review, where we've looked at FIs. They are going to be retained locally because we acknowledge the benefits of having them local, but there's going to be a stronger governance from the centre to ensure consistency across the 4 different areas, and then the centralised function of the financial investigators as well. So that's a piece of work that Anna Sedgwick is taking now. She's the new DCI and takes the lead on economic crime.
Okay.
So she'll be leading on that.
Excellent. Page 41, Dashcam. The portal which allows the public to upload footage so that that can be used in evidence. I just wonder, is that how I'm reading it? Is that right? And is that happening?
Yes, I mean that's. I apologise. I don't know that much around the RPG element of this, but we have invested in a dashcam portal. We invested in a dashcam officer that facilitated, I think, most of this work to happen, and so that is now up and running, so that we can. And in a very similar way, we're looking. I mean, it's not the dashcam stuff, but we through the DAMS project, which is the digital asset management system, which is going to connect lots of different things. That includes a CCTV portal, which in a very similar ilk, members of the public can upload their CCTV to the portal and then direct access by police officers. So it's just an example of utilising technology, one, to increase efficiency, so the police officer doesn't have to go out and seize it, but also it helps the member of the public. They can do it in a far more cost-efficient, time-efficient way by just simply uploading it on a link, and we can send them a link and up it pops. So it's a good example of use of technology.
Thank you. On page 43, 3.39, female offenders,
Yes.
talks about a new strategy there. I wonder whether that was done, and if it was, whether we could see that.
It's a draft strategy still,
Right.
which is approaching final stages, so absolutely you can see it as soon as it's finalised. So Anila's working on that and doing quite a lot, and we've got some good examples of where it's worked, and she's leading on some county-wide strategic meetings with partners to really get buy-in around female cohorts, to ensure that, because with many female offenders, there are the same issues of drugs and alcohol, and that being at the cause of offending, but I think there are possibly greater levers that we could be using across the system to prevent their offending, such as housing, security, safety, and there's a lot of work ongoing. I know that when I was in Barnsley, we had plans for female offenders coming out of prison to have safe accommodation, so and then work with the Complex Lives team to get into employment and giving them the options to break that cycle. So Anila's on with that, and I'm confident that we'll see some more successes coming out of that work.
Okay. We've got a member of the Police and Crime Council who's particularly interested in female offenders and all the issues around that, so maybe something we can return
Absolutely,
to.
or if you give me the details, I'll link Anila in with them.
Oh, okay, thank you. Page 49, I'll end with this one on personal robbery, 3.66. It talks there about a dedicated robbery team in Sheffield. Is it just in the Sheffield district,
Yes.
or is that going to be rolled out elsewhere?
No, and to be fair, these are quite long-term teams. These aren't new. Sheffield has had a dedicated robbery and burglary team since 2018, since the crime review acknowledging the sheer, I think it's the volume. Obviously,
Yes.
Sheffield represents 40% or thereabouts of demand right across the force. And therefore, their numbers of burglaries, their numbers of robbery, plus they've got a huge student population, which makes them far more attractive to burglary and various other things. In response to that kind of that threat and risk in Sheffield, they created, when the districts were given back the CID function, they created a dedicated burglary and robbery team. But Jim Bateman, who is the lead for serious acquittal crime across the force, he's now the DCI in Sheffield, and he has some plans to, which I think I'll refer to in the paper, some plans to merge that team so it becomes one serious acquisitive crime team rather than two separate teams, to increase the proactivity of that team.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all the questions I had, and I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add or to say, or anybody else?
No, I think all the key points have been covered.
Well, thank you very much. That was the Tackling Crime and Antisocial Behaviour report, item 12. So moving on in our agenda to, where do we go? 15, isn't it? Chief Executive reporting. So PCC...
13.
Oh, I'm sorry. Have I missed something out?
False performance outturn.
13.
Which is another one for the deputy who's not here.
Okay. Let me see if I can find that. Yes, 13. Okay. So this is your end of year report. Yes. So probably not a lot for me to say in this other than thank you very much indeed.
I'll take that. You're very welcome.
For all the work that SYP has done during the course of the year, and very much, fulfilling the aims and objectives of the Police and Crime Plan. So I think it sets that out very well. So that was short and sweet. I don't know whether you want to spoil it by adding anything, Lauren.
No, I won't spoil it by adding anything to it. Thank you.
Just tick off the deputy for not being able to present it. Okay. Sophie, item 15.
Yes, and after the enormous build-up, this is the Chief Executive part of the record of key decisions that you've taken, Commissioner, throughout since the last PAB meeting. In 21-22, you've taken 72 decisions, and for the period from February the 25th of February to the 30th of March, you've had a decision around Digital Forensics Unit, the Proceeds of Crime Act grant scheme, and that's the scheme, the table on page 104 shows us who the grants have been given to. Essentially it's a grant scheme for non-profit organisations, and they're allowed to apply for funding of up to $7,500, and the funding must be in line with one of the Police and Crime Commission's strategic priorities that are set out in the Police and Crime Plan. There were 17 applications for funding this time, and the value of those came to 107,000, but we agreed 6, and they came to 36,000. The other key decision that's been made has been around improvements to Hackenthorpe Lodge, which is a sexual assault referral centre, and that's essentially replacement and renewal of some essential equipment that they needed there. And so after the big build-up, that was the report.
Thank you very much. This is where I ask myself some questions, is it, about decisions I've taken?
If you like to.
I can't say I remember all 72. Okay. Thank you very much, Sophie. Thank you for that. That was 15. 16 then is the IEP exception report. And are you doing that as well, Sophie?
I'll be really honest, I don't know very much about the Independent Ethics Committee, so I haven't thought. So I understand that you chaired it, Commissioner. I don't know whether either you or Sally would like to say a few words about the last meeting, perhaps.
Well, I think we've had the paper, and I don't think there's anything I want to add to it. Of course, Anne McCaskill, the chair, as you know, is not well and has had to resign her position there. So that was very, very sad. That was the reason that I was taking the meeting. So we wish her well, because it's been is quite a gruelling regime that she's got for her condition. But unless anybody else wants to say anything about the IEP report, I think we can receive it. Thank you very much. And then the work programme, which is 17.
Sorry, Commissioner, just one
Yes.
thing on the IEP. Once we've got a new chair and I know we've got linked members, would it be worth having a VORG lead as well within the IEP? Just to offer again a little bit more scrutiny, objectivity, some thoughts around what we're doing. I know we're very heavily linked in with the OPCC and the VRU around VORG anyway, but I think given the media scrutiny around VORG, might be a good idea.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, we'll take that back and we'll have a look at that then, Sarah. Thank you for that.
Could we discuss the 29th of April meeting? That's giving a look at the new terms of reference.
So 29th of April. Sally, can you make sure it's all on the agenda? Thank you. Okay, so the work programme then, which is 113, 116. Anything there, Sophie?
No, this is just our usual work programme that alerts everybody to the reports that are coming to the next few meetings.
Okay.
And Sally will be coordinating those as well with Ali.
Thanks. And then the other items are, well, the other item, the budget monitoring report, is really to get that on the record, because this is the first time we've seen it, but we need to put it in the public domain in that way. So unless anyone's got any questions or comments, we'll just do that, we'll receive it. Is there any other business?
No, not from me, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, and our next meeting is on the 12th of May, after the elections, so we shall know who the elected mayor is for South Yorkshire and who are those councillors are. We probably won't know who's on the Police and Crime panel, because they do that a little bit later on, but we will know something, and the world may have shifted and not shifted. Who knows? Thank you very much.
Thank you.